August 19, 1942, arrived under a suffocating tropical sky near Taivu Point on Guadalcanal, where the jungle pressed in from every direction like a living thing. Dense palms locked together overhead, vines coiled around trunks, and the air itself felt heavy enough to drink. Second Lieutenant Genjiro Imi of the Imperial Japanese Army's 8th Independent Anti-Tank Gun Company wrote in his diary that morning, recording a sense of disbelief spreading among the men. He and more than 900 soldiers of Colonel Kayaneo Ichiki's detachment had slipped ashore from destroyers during the night, convinced they were about to sweep aside a weak, frightened enemy and reclaim Henderson Field before sunrise. They had been told the Americans were few, inexperienced, and soft, men unfit for real combat. Ichiki himself dismissed all caution, telling his officers that Americans could not stand against a determined night assault. What none of these veterans, hardened by years of war in China and Southeast Asia, understood was that they were about to collide with something entirely different from anything they had faced before. This would not simply be a defeat. It would be the destruction of every belief they held about war itself. 2 weeks earlier, on August 7, 1942, the first American offensive of the Pacific War had begun. 11,000 Marines of the 1st Marine Division stormed ashore at Lunga Point under the command of Major General Alexander Vandegrift. Operation Watchtower, as it was called, aimed to seize a nearly completed Japanese airfield, establish a defensive perimeter, and hold until relieved. On paper it looked simple. In reality, it would become one of the most brutal campaigns in Marine Corps history. Guadalcanal was not just an island. It was a tropical nightmare. 90 miles long and 25 miles wide, its interior rose into cloud-choked mountains while the coastal plains dissolved into swamp, kunai grass, and jungle so dense that visibility dropped to a few feet. The heat was relentless, the humidity crushing. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds, rivers carried parasites, and disease stalked every man who stepped ashore. On that first morning, however, the Marines encountered almost no resistance. Japanese construction troops and naval personnel fled into the jungle, abandoning equipment, supplies, and the airfield itself. By nightfall, American engineers were already working the runway. They named it Henderson Field, honoring Major Lofton Henderson, killed at Midway. Within days, American aircraft would begin landing, and Guadalcanal would become home to the improvised, battered, but deadly force known as the Cactus Air Force. The Japanese response came swiftly, and it fell hardest on the U.S. Navy. On the night of August 9th, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa led a powerful cruiser force through the darkness and smashed the Allied fleet off Savo Island. 4 heavy cruisers were sunk in less than an hour. More than 1,000 sailors died. Shocked and battered, Allied naval forces withdrew, taking vital supplies with them. The Marines were left stranded, undersupplied, and facing a reinforced enemy. What Japanese command failed to grasp in those early days was that Henderson Field had become the center of gravity for the entire campaign. Whoever controlled it controlled the sea by day. American aircraft could strike any Japanese ship within range, forcing Japan to rely on nighttime destroyer runs that became known as the Tokyo Express. Japan could move men at night, but not heavy equipment, food, or artillery in sufficient quantities. Still, Imperial headquarters demanded immediate action. Lieutenant General Harakichi Hyakutake's 17th Army was ordered to retake the airfield, and the task fell first to Colonel Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment. Ichiki was a brilliant instructor and an aggressive officer, but he was also dangerously overconfident. Ordered to wait for reinforcements, he ignored the directive. Reports from earlier campaigns convinced him that American soldiers would collapse under pressure. On the night of August 18th, 6 destroyers delivered 917 men to Taivu Point. Reconnaissance patrols went out into the jungle, and one of them collided with a Marine patrol near the coast. The brief firefight left dozens of Japanese dead and revealed captured documents that stunned Marine commanders. The Japanese had grossly underestimated American strength. Vandegrift immediately understood an attack was coming. Defenses were rushed into place along the sandbar at the mouth of the Ilu River, misnamed by Marines as the Tenaru. Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Cresswell's battalion dug in, positioning machine guns with overlapping fields of fire. Anti-tank guns were sighted directly across the sand. Mortars and artillery registered their targets. When the night of August 20th fell, the jungle went quiet. Just after midnight, a badly tortured Solomon Islander named Jacob Vuzza staggered into Marine lines with a warning. The Japanese were coming. They came screaming across the sandbar in wave after wave, convinced that spiritual strength and bayonets would shatter American resolve. Instead, they ran into a wall of fire. Water-cooled Browning machine guns opened up, firing without pause, mowing men down in the open. Those who reached the far side were met by 37mm guns firing canister rounds that shredded bodies at close range. The attack continued for hours, relentless and suicidal. By dawn, more than 800 Japanese soldiers lay dead. American tanks crossed the sandbar at first light, crushing resistance and flushing out survivors. By midday, Ichiki's force had ceased to exist. Colonel Ichiki himself was dead. The Marines had lost fewer than 40 men. The shock to Japanese command was profound. An entire regiment destroyed in a single night. Worse, the Americans had not panicked or broken. They had waited, prepared, and annihilated the attack with coordinated firepower. This pattern repeated itself again and again over the next months. Japanese reinforcements arrived by destroyer, hungry and under-equipped. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi brought his brigade ashore and planned a new offensive for September. His attack would come from the south, along a jungle ridge that dominated Henderson Field. Marine intelligence identified the route in advance. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, Red Mike, Edson moved his raiders and paratroopers onto the ridge and prepared defenses with grim precision. On the night of September 12th, Japanese forces infiltrated through ravines and attacked again and again. Mortars, artillery, and machine guns shattered every concentration. Marines fought hand-to-hand in the darkness, but the line held. Sergeant John Basilone stood behind his machine gun through the night, firing until his crew was gone and continuing alone. When dawn came, the ridge was carpeted with Japanese dead. They attacked again the next night and failed again. Bloody Ridge became a symbol of a new reality. As weeks passed, the jungle itself became an enemy. Malaria, dysentery, jungle rot, and starvation ravaged both sides, but the Japanese suffered far worse. Their supply system collapsed under American air power. Soldiers starved while Marines received food, ammunition, and medical care. By October, Japanese troops were dying by the dozens each day without firing a shot. Still, they attacked again. In late October, General Hyakutake committed his last major offensive. Tanks were destroyed, assaults broken, and more than 2,000 Japanese soldiers were killed in a single night of fighting near Henderson Field. At sea, the tide turned permanently in November during the naval Battle of Guadalcanal. Japanese battleships were sunk by radar-directed American gunfire. A massive convoy was annihilated before it could unload. 5,000 Japanese troops died without ever reaching shore. That defeat sealed the fate of the campaign. Starving, diseased, and abandoned, the remaining Japanese forces could no longer fight. In February 1943, under cover of darkness, the Japanese evacuated Guadalcanal. Of 36,000 troops who had served on the island, more than 25,000 were dead. American losses were heavy but sustainable. The strategic initiative had shifted forever. Guadalcanal was the moment Japan lost the war it could never win. For Japanese survivors, the campaign shattered every illusion. Courage and sacrifice were meaningless against an enemy whose supplies never ran out, whose artillery never stopped firing, whose wounded lived, and whose losses could be replaced. For Americans, Guadalcanal proved that Japanese forces could be defeated, that combined arms and logistics mattered more than doctrine and myth. The jungle had been the crucible where two visions of war collided. Only one could survive. Guadalcanal was where fear entered the Japanese ranks, not fear of death, but fear of inevitability. The realization that no amount of bravery could overcome an enemy built on systems, industry, and relentless firepower. From that point forward, the Pacific War would be fought on American terms, and the long road to Tokyo would begin in the steaming jungles where illusions died and reality took their place.